Hello, Manhwa lovers. The story begins in the countryside, where we see Do-hee Yang asking if our protagonist, Jin W. Kin, was paying attention. The girl wanted him to hurry up and get to Yosol's house. The boy apologized for being distracted, but Yang was confused because he kept being intimidated by playing with them. Even Runa thought he was pathetic. The latter asked Jin if he wanted to be her younger brother, but he saw her as someone noisy, which she denied while shouting. When they arrived at Ken's house, the girl was curious to know why everyone had gathered there. It turned out the girls wanted to use her computer, which annoyed Kim a bit because she needed to study, so she talked to Jin. Kim began to tease him because she had told him to stop the girls from coming to her house if they wanted to, and she asked why he was so timid. As she lost her focus, Kim sent him to the market to buy her a soda, which Jin did reluctantly. That same afternoon, the boy wondered why all the girls around him always intimidated him, since he didn't know any who hadn't. However, he remembered one who always comforted him when he made mistakes and hugged him. This same girl greeted him and asked if he was buying something. It was Sin Inji, the girl Jin liked. He was still shy around her, which Inji found cute. She asked if he was busy, and Jin said no. Then Inji leaned close to his ear and proposed that Jin go to her house to do something fun, which embarrassed him greatly, not knowing what her words meant. But the sound of a car braking snapped Jin out of his dreams. The boy didn't know why he dreamed of that memory from 8 years ago. He wasn't sure if it was worth going back to his hometown after so long. 8 years ago, following his grandfather's wishes, he left the city to study in Seoul. His grandfather earned a lot of money cultivating herbs, so his family was able to live in Seoul without difficulty. However, the problem was that Jin wasn't good at studying. Even though he entered university in Seoul, he didn't do very well. For him, university was important, and he diligently spent his first years there. After completing his military service, he thought he was finally free, but to his bad luck, at 22 years old, he was discharged early. Although he thought it was a mistake, it turned out to be true, so he had to go back to school. For Jin, hearing about his early discharge felt like thunder striking, telling him everything was over. In the end, Jin decided to go to his grandfather's school to help him cultivate herbs, but he wondered why he had to go to Seoul. When they arrived at their destination, Jin was tired from the trip, but it was really his father who was exhausted because he drove the whole way. His dad went to talk to his grandfather, but Jin planned to take a walk first to clear his head. He mostly wanted to say hello, wondering what he should say. No matter how much time had passed since his friends had intimidated him, he had known them for a long time. Later, we see Jin walking through the center of the village, where the daily life of its inhabitants was quite peaceful, something Jin liked. Although there were new buildings, the rural atmosphere was still the same. It wasn't that he hated it. It rather calmed him. In Seoul, there was always something new. Trends changed and many things happened in an instant. Others might not notice, but he felt like he was the only one being left behind. He remembered that he rarely felt relieved and thought a more rural place suited him, until Jin realized that he used to play with Yang there. He wondered if she still lived nearby. Suddenly, he noticed a girl staring at him intently. Lost in his thoughts, Jin didn't know why the girl was staring at him. It was strange. Her first words were Jin, followed by his full name, asking when he had returned. She was interested in knowing when he came back and mentioned they hadn't had much contact during that time. This left Jin even more confused, since he still didn't know who she was and didn't remember anyone so pretty from his neighborhood. So the boy directly asked who she was, apologizing for not remembering her. The girl found it unbelievable but reintroduced herself as Yang, saying she was his only friend. She asked again if he didn't remember her, but Jin was shocked because he remembered her differently. As a grumpy girl, Jin asked if he was looking for a fight. Of course, Jin didn't recognize her because she had changed a lot. He accidentally asked if she was his childhood friend and found it strange to feel that way about a childhood friend, which embarrassed him. Even so, he asked when she'd arrived, and Jin explained it had been about 30 minutes ago. Jae assumed he hadn't met the others yet, so she wanted him to follow her because everyone was gathered together. This intrigued Jin since he didn't know where they were until Jae mentioned they had been living in a shared house since that day. Meanwhile, we see Jin's father yelling at the grandfather about what he had done. The grandfather knew his grandson had gone through many hardships in an unfamiliar environment, so he had prepared a reward for all the youth his grandson had lost. Even though Jin's father believed the grandfather was getting old, we return to Jin and Young, who were heading to the shared house a little far from the grandfather's home. Young added that each of them was there for a reason, but they would talk about it later. She wanted him to go in quickly because everyone would be surprised to see him, and Jin timidly agreed. The boy thought everyone was inside the house, even though he believed he couldn't be as good as Yang. He knew everyone could change in 8 years. Yang energetically announced her return and told both Kin and Runa to guess who she had brought. This intrigued both girls since they saw she had brought a man on her first day. Jay didn't know what they were talking about, but Jin could only think that none of them had changed, as he recognized them instantly. Despite being 20 years old, Runa looked the same, as did Kim at 26. Jin greeted them after a long time without seeing them. Both girls were speechless at first, but quickly became excited to see him, especially because they didn't recognize him at first since he had grown so much. Jin thought they were still the same because they were very noisy, so much so that they noticed he could now respond to them. Even so, Jin was curious to know if Inji was living with them. This left Kim and Runa speechless, and Yang seemed nervous, which confused Jin a little. But just as they were about to explain what had happened, Jin received a call and had to excuse himself to answer it. It was his dad, informing him that there had been some issues with the company, so he had to return to Seoul first. Jin understood, but when they talked about where he would stay, the boy was confused because he thought it would be at his grandfather's house. However, his dad mentioned that the grandfather would be away for a few days, so they had prepared a separate place for him to stay. Jin understood but asked where that place was. His dad said it was a shared house. The boy had a bad feeling and asked his dad if it was the one above the market. His dad wondered how he knew that, and Jin was left speechless, not knowing why this was happening. He questioned if he would have to live in the same building as his friends. Jin managed to carry his luggage to his room until he searched for the box cutter he had left nearby. Then someone handed it to him. It was Yang, who seemed a bit embarrassed. She told him to take it and then left, slightly blushing, which gave Jin a bad feeling. After the call, the grandfather arrived at the house and began explaining everything to the girls. Jin learned that first, his grandfather had bought the house for some reason, and second, he wasn't at the farm because he would be working in the shared house as the manager. At first, Jay was outraged and objected, but she was instantly stopped by Ryukin. With no other place to stay, Jin was forced to move in, wondering what he should do now. He didn't think it was fair to suddenly end up living with 3 women, especially since they had teased him as a child and now were very beautiful. To make matters worse, Runa was now rummaging through his things. Runa, given the time Jin had spent in Seoul, wasn't doing anything in particular, but Jin wanted her to leave his personal belongings alone. For Runa, it wasn't a big deal. She found it a bit amusing. However, Jin thought he wasn't naive anymore since he had some private things on his phone. Then he realized Runa was looking at all the religious content on his phone. Despite Jin asking her not to look at it, she continued teasing him about everything she saw, even recommending he set a password next time. At that moment, Jin could only think that now he was an adult. He thought he had improved, but he couldn't help what was happening. Even so, he knew he was the manager, but wondered what he should do the next morning. Being Saturday, there was a full breakfast on the table. The girls wondered about the delicious food that was served. Jin, as the manager, had the desire to do something like that since he knew how to handle some household tasks. Kim was very surprised because she didn't think he knew how to cook, but that was because they had all overslept. Yang wasn't worried about the taste of the rice, but rather about the idea of Jin making breakfast every day. Even so, she thanked him for the food, which embarrassed Jin. He didn't know what had happened at that moment, as it seemed Yang didn't like him living there. He preferred to take a bath and told the girls to leave their plates in the sink. This intrigued Yang because she didn't understand why Jin didn't respond to her compliment. While Jin was changing to take a bath, he thought about how long it had been since he'd heard a thank you from Yang, since she always teased him and ran away. He wondered if she had really changed in 8 years, because he remembered her as the girl who enjoyed teasing others. Even so, he regretted ignoring her and decided he would cook her something good that night. Suddenly, Kim remembered something and asked if they had heard that Jin was going to bathe, receiving confirmation. Kim couldn't believe it and quickly went to where the boy was. Upon reaching the bathroom, she found Jin with a swimsuit in his hand. Jin tried to excuse himself, saying he had found it lying around and it wasn't his fault. However, Kim approached to take it away from him and asked Jin not to tell the other girls about the situation, as she would get angry. This confused Jin a lot, but he asked her to leave because he wanted to bathe. Kim wanted it to be a promise. The boy could only think about how beautiful Kim looked at that moment, remembering how lovely she had grown over the years. Even so, he scolded himself for what he was thinking. Meanwhile, Runa wanted to know why Kim had run out. Kim lied, saying she had helped him figure out how to get the hot water in the bathtub to work, but she was embarrassed. Despite not having seen him in a long time, she noticed he looked more manly. Additionally, she observed that he was interested in what she had bought and hoped it wouldn't be a problem in the future. Kim sighed, saying people change too easily, which Yang didn't understand. Kim didn't give it much importance but wanted to celebrate that Jin was now an adult and proposed drinking something that night. Both Yang and Runa agreed. Kim wanted to celebrate with a welcome party, though Yang thought it sounded like something an old woman would say. Kim had another intention. She wanted to see what he was like when drinking. This intrigued the girls. That same afternoon, they were celebrating that Jin was now an adult, and because they had bought too many juices. Kim was amazed at the delicious food Jin had prepared, so they distracted him so he wouldn't notice their intentions. After a few hours, Runa proposed a game. Jin didn't know any for those kinds of situations, which annoyed Yang because he was from Seoul, where that was common. Runa thought of a good game everyone would know and proposed playing Truth or Dare. First, they had to spin the bottle, and the person it pointed to would have to answer the question. Jin agreed as long as the bottle didn't point to him. Unfortunately for him, the bottle did point to him, and he thought it was a joke. Runa asked if he had liked any of them 8 years ago, and Jin preferred to chug his juice instead of answering. Yang was amazed that he did it without hesitation and said he shouldn't have. Nonetheless, Runa was excited to know who the girl he liked was. Jin could only think about Inji, and feared that if they found out, they would all tease him. But Jin felt dizzy and ended up lying on the floor, scaring the girls. They all knew it was because he had drunk the juice too quickly. Runa carried him to his room and reminded him to have moderation. Jin thanked her. Kim wanted to keep drinking juice with Yang, but the latter wasn't very convinced. When Runa managed to take him to his room, she laid him on his bed and confessed her plan to observe Jin's habits, admitting they had gotten him into trouble. Then she said goodbye to him. However, Jin grabbed her arm and asked her not to leave. Runa was a bit confused, but Jin ended up hugging her. Runa tapped him lightly because of the sudden hug, but Jin tried to keep her still. Runa thought that due to the juice he had drunk earlier, Jin had turned into a different person. Even so, Jin asked her how she had been all this time they hadn't seen each other. Runa pretended to be relaxed in that situation, but Jin kissed her, even asking what she thought about it. Runa was even more nervous and preferred to tell him he was crazy as she tried to leave. However, Jin told her how beautiful she looked, leaving Runa intrigued. Jin mentioned that she had completely changed because, when they were young, she was just a girl from his neighborhood. Runa asked him to stop playing games, but Jin insisted it wasn't a joke. Even so, the girl didn't entirely believe his words, though she also admitted it might be because of the juice he drank, and she wasn't sure what might happen at that moment. Jin began grabbing some flans he had stored. Runa found him interesting and different from when she used to play the guitar alone. However, when Jin's chalice began to shine, Runa never imagined she would clean the boy's chalice, but seeing it, she was impressed by its intense shine. Jin directly asked if it was her first time seeing one. She denied it, saying she had seen it online, which made Jin praise her attempt. He then guided her on how to clean one properly. Despite being lost in her thoughts, Runa followed Jin's instructions. When he brought her back to reality, she thought she had done something wrong, but that wasn't the case. Jin simply wanted Runa to clean the chalice thoroughly, or to admit if she was sleepy. This annoyed the girl since she wasn't tired. Jin sarcastically apologized, understanding it was her first time cleaning a chalice, and suggested they go to sleep. But Runa was determined to do it properly, following instructions she found on Jin's phone. Runa hurried to clean the chalice so much that holy water emerged from it, which Runa drank. Jin apologized for what happened, as he hadn't expected that. Runa pushed him, feeling like she was doing everything he asked, and now wanted to start believing in God. The story shifted to a memory of the past when Jin asked Runa if there was someone she liked. Runa didn't believe it since she didn't have close friends. Kim asked if Jin wasn't her friend, which Runa denied, as she didn't see him as a man. In the present, they were having a mass. Jin and Runa were there. She thought it was different to attend a mass since she had read online that it was something scary, but now she was praying. Jin was lost in his thoughts. He had only been there a day. Although he started by teasing Runa, he believed it was wrong to stop praying. Still, Jin continued teasing her, calling her a pervert, something she denied immediately. Jin knew she was lying because he noticed her inner glow was more intense. Runa apologized for lying, which made Jin blush. He suggested they watch something else to purify their souls. As they saw a dog pass by outside the house, they continued their prayers to God for their souls to be freed. However, when Jin went to fetch holy water, some spilled on Runa's back, surprising her with how warm it was. Jin quickly looked for a towel to dry her. They didn't notice that the door was slightly ajar. Outside was Kim, shocked by what she saw and thinking the two of them were crazy. The next day, Jin woke up with a terrible headache. He realized he had returned to the countryside and was now living with his childhood friends while being the house administrator. He remembered being with them at the welcome party, but couldn't recall what happened afterward. He believed he had collapsed from exhaustion and admitted he didn't drink much juice, fearing they would tease him for his headache. While getting some water, he noticed something. Meanwhile, Yang was cooking when she heard a scream and thought Jin was awake. Jin, quite nervous, was confronted by Runa, who asked where he was going next. Runa was upset, asking if he didn't remember anything she had told him the day before. When Jin remained silent, Runa understood he was serious and decided to tell the others. Jin, alarmed, begged her not to. Runa wanted him to feel a little shame because he had said things he unconsciously didn't mean to say. Jin apologized, clarifying that he didn't remember and admitting he now saw Runa differently. Recognizing her as someone beautiful, Runa was speechless, as it was the same thing he had mentioned before. Jin continued, saying that if she wanted, he would leave the house but asked her not to tell the others. He knew it was a silly request, but hoped she would understand as his childhood friend. Runa agreed to keep it a secret, which made Jin happy. However, Runa reminded him of all the prayers they had made and wanted him to be responsible, asking him to be her follower. This made Jin blush, and he asked what she meant by follower. For Runa, it was clear. He would have to pay attention to everything she ordered him to do. If she asked him to go somewhere, he would have to go. And if she told him to get up from the table, he would have to do it. Jin asked Runa to stop saying nonsense, but they heard Yang knocking on the room door, calling Jin to wake up and take out the trash. Since he hadn't woken up early, Yang was already cooking. At that moment, the door opened, and Runa stepped out, asking Yang if she had slept well. This surprised Yang, as she didn't know what Runa was doing in Jin's room. Runa explained that she had been waking Jin up because he wouldn't get out of bed, so she had to drag him out. Yang, seeing Jin on the floor, asked if his head hurt, and crouching down, mentioned it reminded her of when they used to play together. Even so, Yang told Jin to go take out the trash, and Runa said goodbye to him. A little later, Jin was deep in thought. He knew he had attended his first mass, but couldn't remember it, which he found unfortunate, especially since he had been threatened. He remembered praying with Runa but couldn't make sense of it, as she was just another girl from the town. Thinking of how happy she looked made Jin blush a lot. His situation felt so complicated that his head was spinning, so he decided to go have breakfast. Later, when he returned to the house and didn't see her, Jin asked about her. Young mentioned that she had skipped breakfast. Since she wasn't someone who usually got headaches, Young wondered what Runa might have eaten to feel unwell. Even so, Young asked Jin to sit down because breakfast was almost ready. Although Jin wanted to help her, Runa told him to sit down. Jin had a bad feeling about Runa since he didn't know what she was planning. After that, Jin let out a small shout, which surprised Yang. Jin explained that he remembered something, but the truth was that Runa was bothering him with her feet. Yang commented that she never expected to live with Jin despite them being childhood friends, as they still acted like kids. She had also heard from her grandfather that if it was Jin, nothing would happen, so she wondered if that was the reason he had been sent to stay with them. This made Jin laugh a little, but he was still more focused on what Runa might be plotting. Yang only asked what was wrong because of the bad look on his face. Even though Jin said nothing was wrong, Runa kept bothering him. Runa thought Jin was a fool who couldn't do anything, and that her assumptions about him still held true. However, she remembered part of the mass, which embarrassed her so much that she kicked Jin harder. When the boy shouted again, Yang asked why she had done that. Jin quickly explained that he had hurt his finger while dealing with the trash, so Yang apologized for not being able to help him. However, Runa came up with an idea and asked Jin if he wanted her to feed him, which surprised him. Yang was nervous but thought Jin was no longer a child, though she found it excessive. As Runa kept asking while teasing him, Jin had to accept. This made Runa laugh a little, but since Jin had agreed, Runa was now going to feed him. This embarrassed Jin a lot, but having no other choice, he accepted the food. Yang looked a little jealous, and when she asked if it was delicious, Jin confirmed it. To this, Yang compared him to a puppy asking for a treat. Jin thought Runa was secretly playing with him while Yang insulted him in her mind. He wondered why all the women around him were like that, until he suddenly thought about wanting to see his Nuna Inji. Remembering a little more about her, he asked both girls about Inji, leaving them confused. Runa asked why he was talking about her so suddenly. Jin assumed that Inji didn't know he was back, and it was strange that she hadn't found out yet. He wondered if something was going on. In truth, he thought he might have escaped from another matter without it getting worse, but he noticed the tense atmosphere in the room and recalled that the same thing had happened when he asked about her on the first day. So, he questioned the girls about what was going on. Yang was nervous about answering, but preferred Jin to go see her instead of explaining, which left Jin a bit confused. That same afternoon, Jin was outside a house waiting. He remembered that Yang had prepared extra food for him and told him to give some to Inji when he went to greet her, which she would understand. Yang had also given him the girl's address. Even so, Jin didn't understand what was happening. He guessed it could be something serious or some kind of illness. Then he wondered if she had gotten married and divorced after he left. As if that were the case, he thought she might be in a mental breakdown. He noticed no one was coming out and considered returning later, until Jin remembered something. Looking to the left, at a small little house, there was a spot where trash was piled up. Although it wasn't easy to see and few people knew about it, there was a small path there. If he went a bit further, he'd enter the house's garden. To him, it felt like a secret passage since he used that path when they used to visit Inji's house. She would always greet them with a smile, and they'd have fun for a while. Although he thought it was a waste of time to think about that now, he felt no one would be there, so taking that path seemed unnecessary. He felt the urge to leave, but then noticed Inji playing the guitar outside. Just as Jin was about to leave, he stepped on a twig which alerted Inji to his presence, leaving Jin blushing because he had been discovered. At that moment, Inji looked quite nervous. Jin tried to explain, saying he thought no one was there. The girl shouted for Jin to wait a moment, saying it was a mistake, and commented that it was Jin from 8 years ago. She added that Yang had asked him to bring her food. Inji noticed it was the same bag Yang used to bring her meals and couldn't believe what was happening, mostly because Jin had seen her playing the guitar and she didn't know what to say. Even so, Jin waited until she calmed down, which Inji appreciated. Afterward, they talked about Jin entering because there was no one around. This disheartened Inji a bit because she knew everyone was working at that time, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere that Jin noticed. Still, he handed her the bag. Inji was happy with the delicious food Yang had sent, but Jin was intrigued as to why his usually innocent Nuna had become like this. Nonetheless, she seemed happy with the delicious side dishes, but she also felt discouraged, thinking people saw her poorly for always staying at home. Jin tried to cheer her up a bit. It was then that Jin revealed to her that she still looked as beautiful as ever, which made Inji blush deeply. Jin thought what he was saying was crazy, mainly because it might make him seem like a pervert. However, Inji found it amusing. Despite Jin always saying strange things, she agreed with him, which led her to pat his head and thank him for comforting his Nuna. She now noticed how much he had grown. She remembered when he was still a child, someone she had to buy toys for and take care of. However, now Inji apologized for not having washed her hands yet. Jin wanted to know if something had happened because no one was telling him anything. He was there to resolve that question, even though he thought it might be unexpected. If he could help her, he would. The girl appreciated it, but dismissed it as something from the past. 3 years ago, she got a job but never realized how many extra hours she had to work back then. Since she handled tasks that weren't even hers, her coworkers would ask her to finish quickly. Even though Inji kept in mind the approaching deadline, she was always the only one being asked to finish quickly. Eventually, she noticed all the notifications on her phone were from friends and family congratulating her. That's when she realized it was her birthday, something she hadn't even remembered. As her boss burdened her with too much work, she ended up quitting after 2 years. For Inji, that was the reason she didn't go out or did strange things, which made her feel useless. But Jin didn't see it that way. He recognized how hard she had worked and thought she must hate that boss. Even though it was difficult for him to help her, Jin wanted to prevent his Nuna from thinking that way in the future and encouraged her to try to overcome it. These words made Inji happy, and she thanked him. Jin told her he would come back next time, a little earlier, but this raised a question for Inji. Later, we see Jin walking down the street. Inji's question was why he was living so close to her house, something Jin had also noticed on his first day there. He knew that the house they were in had previously been rented by his grandfather, and he decided he would investigate it later when he had the chance. That night, Jin was quite tired since he had to do many things. When he returned home, he noticed that Ryon seemed calmer despite her earlier behavior that morning. When he came back, she didn't even pay him any attention. However, he remembered Inji playing the guitar. Not wanting to play with Fifi, he decided to go to sleep until he heard someone knocking on his door. Outside was Runa, who wanted to tell him something. This left Jin puzzled, mainly because he didn't know what the girl wanted. Despite being nervous, he went to see what she needed. He was surprised to see Runa in sportswear, and she asked if she could come in for a moment. The scene shifted to a memory of Runa, who was tired on her usual morning route. She often crossed paths with people who sometimes greeted her. Thinking about the shared house she entered every morning, it was a familiar place where all the childhood friends gathered. It was also where Jin's grandfather worked. So, subtly, it was close by, and the monthly rent was cheap. Moreover, as she had mentioned to her father, she needed to study abroad, which required her to slow down. Still, she wondered if things had changed when she entered the shared house. She felt it was significant because she found a new purpose for her daily life. Back to Jin, he was left speechless by Runa's beauty, especially with her hair down, which made her look very different from usual. To Jin, she was stunning. He couldn't find the words to describe what he saw. However, Runa closed the door as soon as she stepped in. She noticed the chalice shining and asked why it was happening, wondering if Jin was reminiscing about something or playing by himself, which he denied. For Runa, it wasn't a big deal since, being Sunday night, everyone was already asleep early. She told Jin that if he needed any help, she'd be willing to accompany him, which made Jin blush a lot. However, Jin didn't want to be blackmailed again, which Runa found amusing. That's why she asked him if he really wanted her to help him with the chalice's shine, to which Jin didn't even know how to respond. Runa just smiled, saying it was a joke. She knew Jin well and was aware he would never ask her for something like that. Instead, Runa blackmailed him again and began giving Jin a massage but with 2 sponges. Jin was entirely focused on how relaxing it felt. Meanwhile, he grabbed 2 items Runa had hidden. Before praying, Jin mentioned that he had stopped by the store to buy a rosary, which embarrassed Runa. Jin thought they couldn't continue with a mass without a rosary, and Runa asked if he wanted to start praying when they were about to preach God's word. Runa felt the atmosphere change so much that she realized she had been a bit dizzy earlier. Despite being very embarrassed, she asked Jin to do his best, which made Jin laugh. He asked her to do the same. This annoyed Runa, who threw a pillow at him. Jin didn't understand why she did that until Runa reminded him that he was her servant at that moment. This annoyed Jin slightly until he remembered something. He wanted to know if it was true that everyone else was asleep. Something Ryun affirmed without understanding what it was about. That's why Jin grabbed her arm and took her outside. To Runa, it was madness, and she wanted to return to the room, but Jin wanted her to stop calling him a servant. Ryun understood his silly game, so she kissed him and mentioned that she really wanted to find faith in God. They began their prayers, both with a fervent desire to find God. However, when Jin used the holy water, Runa wanted to keep preaching God's word so much that Jin couldn't believe she was the same girl he knew. But he supposed this was the true Runa. He accidentally let slip that she was pretty, which embarrassed Runa, who wanted to know why he said that suddenly, especially since Jin truly thought so. Runa commented that he had been complimenting her since the night before, something Jin explained he didn't remember. This annoyed Runa a little before they resumed their prayers. Jin wondered what would have happened if he had stopped being shy as a child. Would he have seen Runa's true personality? Or what had happened to her to lead her to have a prayer session with him? Amidst the prayers, Jin told her again that she was pretty. Seeing Runa blush, he felt he had gone too far. However, Runa asked him to compliment her more, which embarrassed Jin. Still, he continued saying nice things about her, and that every time he saw her, he liked her more. This made Runa happy, and she told him she would say something properly in the future. But for now, she proposed continuing to pray together in the future. Hearing that, Jin spilled his holy water, which he found disappointing because it was careless. Still, that same night, when they returned to the room, Jin didn't know what to say. At that moment, Runa simply hugged him and asked him to act with more confidence. She then said goodnight and asked him to make breakfast the next day and not oversleep. Runa remembered that Jin had asked her to tell him something, so she wondered if she had truly found belief in God. The next day, while Jin was clearing the table, Runa approached him from behind and commented that the food was delicious. This made Jin blush at the sudden compliment, but he thanked her. Still, he hoped Runa would be careful about things, which surprised Yang since they were acting strangely. Yang asked Kim about it, and although nervous, Kim believed it was better for them to get along, which confused Jin even more. Later, both Runa and Yang left to do their things. Jin asked them to be careful, especially since he knew Yang worked part-time and Runa was an athlete. Even though they were all on vacation, he saw how much effort they put in and wondered if he should study or do something similar, until he heard Kim calling him. She asked him to accompany her for a moment. Although Jin tried to decline because he had to wash the dishes, this angered Kim, who insisted he could do it later since she had something important to tell him. This left Jin speechless. That same afternoon, as they walked, Jin noticed that despite the importance of the situation, it felt awkward. He knew that for a long time they had always made jokes like this, even when he was a child. Kim would always ask if he had fun with her since Jin was always interested in playing with the girl. However, he would end up doing Kim's chores instead. On another occasion, Kim asked for his arm and told him not to move, or he'd get in trouble as she wanted to practice a wrestling hold on him. Jin still remembered all of that and wondered what kind of person would do that to a child. More importantly, he questioned where she was taking him and what was so important that she had to say, till he realized she was taking him to the police station. To Jin, this was something that could happen, given how curious everything had been in recent days. He wondered how Kim knew about it. Kim also had the assumption they were just passing by when she asked Jin to wait for a moment and promised to return quickly. This left Jin with a terrible feeling. He grabbed her arm and asked her to resolve it with words. Kim was shocked, wondering if he was crazy or why he was grabbing her. Although she wanted him to calm down, she managed to free herself and yelled at Jin to just wait, as she would return and explain everything. Jin could only think he was doomed. Shortly after, he heard Kim had returned. When he turned to see her, he was quite surprised by what he saw. Kim was wearing her police uniform. He asked why she was wearing it, and she clarified that she was a police officer and had to wear it because last year she had finally completed the academy. This was something Jin couldn't believe, thinking that if someone like her were a police officer, the country they lived in would be in ruins. This earned him a punch from Kim. Jin wanted to know what was so important that she had to tell him. He asked if she had brought him there just to tease him as always, saying she was still the same. Kim denied this, saying she had seen him 2 days earlier with Runa.